crazy time in David's life, and we've seen him at his best, and here we see him at his worst. He had an opportunity, didn't he? As he's crowned king, what were the clever mnemonics we came up with last time? He could squander everything that God had given him, or he could steward it appropriately. He could turn to a life of worship, or he could just waste it all. And he seems to do both in equal measure. Last week we saw him just dancing before the Lord, 100% focused on what God was doing in his life. It's like he didn't care what anyone else thought. At this moment, he was just riding high. The artist, the warrior, the king, all of those were flowing in just a perfect, harmonious way. But here we get the story of waste and squandering. We get a story that is just such a sad, you can tell David did not edit this chapter, right? Because if you were the king, don't you think you'd want to sanitize some of the documents? Let's not have that in the papers, for goodness sake. Why all the gory detail? I mean, it just goes on and on and on about David messing up. I don't know if you'd like to be known for the worst thing that you've ever done, but certainly this is one of those boxes we tick. Would you rather be known for slaying the giant Goliath, or would you rather be known for this? Well, just like David, we are just a big mix of everything, aren't we? We're good, bad, and everything in between. As Martin said, we're saints and sinners at the same time. It's just the reality of life. But there's so much we can learn from David's life, and so much even from David's failures. Now, you caught how the story unfolds. It's not a very pretty picture, but really it starts off with, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go to battle. Now, when you heard that, there should have been some dramatic music like, dun, 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 because where is David supposed to be? He's supposed to be out fighting. He's supposed to be a warrior. And in fact, we learn in the life of David, he is at his best when he is fighting, when he is leading his mighty men, when he's taking care of kingdom business. It's like nothing stops him, and he's right where he needs to be. But where is he in the spring at the time when kings go to war? He decides to send out Joab, the commander of the army, all his mighty men, Uriah the Hittite, who's married to Bathsheba. They're all fighting. And of course, David is just back home. Now, I don't know if you've ever been bored. Anyone ever been bored? What do they say? Idle hands are the devil's playground. You know, that's kind of the way it is. But when we get bored, you know there's something bad that's about to happen, because what are you going to do when you're bored? You start flipping through the channels. You start going in places you probably don't belong, right? Who knows? You might get online and buy a bunch. I don't know what you do when you get bored. Maybe you just shop. I'm not sure, but it's deadly. No, I'm just kidding. Shopping's okay. But when David got bored, of course, he decided that they didn't have a cable TV back then, so he wasn't really flipping the channels, but he was flipping house tops. Let's go around. Oh, let's see what's playing over there. Okay, no, nobody. Oh, Bathsheba. Hey, I like this channel. And he decides to spend a little time. But he doesn't just look, right? He goes all the way for it. He grabs her, brings her to the castle, takes it. I mean, it's just bad news. And even though she shouldn't conceive, certainly she does. And man, it just goes from bad to worse. He brings Uriah in to have a conversation. This is pretty smart on David's part. I'll get him liquored up. I'll send him home. He'll sleep with his wife, and everything will be cool. Sure, she'll be pregnant, but everyone will assume it's his, right? That'll be fine, and then there won't be any stain on me or on the kingdom or what have you. It's such a convenient and clever way to do. But Uriah won't have any of it. Did you hear what he said when he gets the invitation? He said, I mean, it's pretty cutting to David, who's been spending time just watching TV and sitting on the lazy boy instead of going to fight. It says, but Uriah slept at the entrance of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord. And when David says, why didn't you go down? He says, the ark and Israel, remember the ark with which David was dancing before all his might last week, where he says, I'll become even more undignified. I'm going to give everything for God. And Uriah just kind of reminds him, the ark and Israel and Judah remain in booths. What are booths? They're tents, right? They're out fighting the enemy. They're out to battle. They're off serving the kingdom. And he says, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? And David's like, yes, that is exactly the plan. Get it done. But he says, as you live, as your soul lives, I will not do such a thing. And of course, Uriah probably didn't know it at the time, as he's being so correct, so honorable, so righteous, but he just signed his own death warrant. Because David decides, hey, this guy's got to go. He tells Joab, put him in the front of the fighting, pull back from him, let him get annihilated against the wall with all the stones that are being dropped, all the arrows that are coming his way, the spears flying. Just let nature take its course. And Joab, of course, is no saint. He does it, no problem. The king says it, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And sure enough, Uriah died. Uriah! I mean, it's hard to imagine the kind of betrayal that we're talking about here, because Uriah was one of David's mighty men. He was one of those kind of closest warriors that David did everything with before he becomes king. The kingdom would not be in David's hand were it not for men like Uriah. And how does he pay him back? Steals his wife, sends him to... I mean, this is a pretty weird, slippery slope, right? David probably didn't get up that morning thinking, you know what, I need to kill someone. I mean, I know we all get up in the morning like that sometimes, but I mean, after we've had our coffee, after the clarity comes forth, he didn't decide when he woke up this morning and asked God for a brand new day and gave him thanks. He probably wasn't thinking, you know what, I could really murder someone with my free time. That never happens, right? And that's the way sin is so creepy in our lives. It's so sneaky. It just kind of creeps in. It starts with something small, like I'm just looking at the housetops and seeing what's out there. Then it gets a little worse, right, with the sexual sin. Then it gets a little worse with this kind of plot to cover it up. And then it gets even worse with the murder of Uriah. I mean, how could you call it anything else? It just seems like a soldier fallen in battle. But what is the reason? The reason is because David decides this guy needs to go. Have you been in that kind of trap before where you just feel like one thing after another, and it starts so small, even seemingly innocent, just a little transgression, and all of a sudden the snowball gets rolling, and you are just in a bag of hurt because of all of these many things have now swirled into something horrendous that takes on a life of its own. I mean, this is some really important stuff. What do you do to handle these kind of raging emotions, these desires that are in every single one of us? I mean, how do you have a handle on that as a follower of Jesus? It's a big challenge, isn't it? Have you ever been tempted in some kind of inappropriate way, wanting something you can't have? Being angry or contemptuous over something that's not the way it should? I mean, it's just so common. It's such a human experience, just a natural, seemingly part of our fallenness that it seems to go without comment. And if anything, society just kind of applauds you as you go along. Oh, yeah, you see someone you like? You should definitely pursue that. But I'm married, that does not matter. I mean, it's just crazy. When was the last time you saw a TV show about a happily married couple? I mean, gosh, what is it? The Cosby Show? I mean, even though you know how that turned out. I mean, it's just like worse. I mean, you can't watch normal TV anymore. You flip the channels. It's like David on the household, right? I mean, I know the world's going to hell in a handbasket. You've heard that message before, but it's crazy time to be a follower of Jesus, because there are things that are calling to us that we got to figure out a way to say, nope, not today. This is not the way my life is going to go. I'm not going to waste this incredible opportunity. I'm not going to squander what God has given me to steward. It's a little bit like that, what's that redneck toolkit? When something is stuck and it shouldn't be, well, no, there's only two items in a true redneck toolkit. You probably heard this, right? It's duct tape and WD-40, right? That's all you need, because if it's stuck and it shouldn't be, you use the WD-40, and if it's not stuck and it should be, then you use the duct tape. That's all you need. It pretty much takes care of everything. Well, Jesus has a similar kind of redneck toolkit when it comes to these unhealthy desires. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus highlights two incredibly powerful things that war within us: lust and anger. They're with us seemingly all the time. When there's something that we want but we can't have, what are we doing? We're lusting for it. We're coveting it in every way. When there's something that's not right, that we wish was different, what do we start to do? We start to get angry and contemptuous of the people around us. It's just like the responses of a 2-year-old, right? It's just, I'm either going to wail and cry and hit, or I'm just going to take what I want. And that's exactly the mode that David is in. And Jesus, of course, gives some fairly strong medicine for both of these because it's incredibly important. You remember the words of Jesus when he starts off and he says this, "You've heard it said to those in ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire." Can you imagine? Jesus takes something that is so explosive within us, that anger, that bitterness. He says, yeah. I know you've heard it said, don't kill people. Anybody kill anyone this morning? Well, don't admit it, right? We're streaming live, so that'd be bad. But Jesus says what that comes from is not just the killing people. What it comes from is something way, way deeper, way sneakier, way more insidious in our lives. And it's that tendency, right? When things are not the way we want them, we start to look at people with contempt. We start to look at people with anger. He says the same thing about adultery, right? You know this, how it goes. He says, "You've heard it said, do not commit adultery." I won't ask you if you committed adultery this morning. We'll just move right past it. He says, "You shall not commit it. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Again, same thing. You're looking out over the rooftops. You see, already David is lost in that moment. Why? Because it's something that started deep within him, and all of a sudden now it's bloomed into full flower, right? All the fruit of all that evil junk has just reared its head, and there it is for all the world to see. Now you might say, is it worse to call someone you fool, or is it worse to murder them? I think we might have a sliding scale there. I'd rather be called a fool than have you shoot me, right? We'll just call it there. I'd rather have lusting than actual adultery. Right? I mean, there is a consequences. There's how much collateral damage, right? I mean, there's certainly these things have a life of their own as they get worse and worse and worse. But Jesus is saying you don't just attend to the outside on these matters. Where do you need to get at? You need to get at the inside of these matters. What is his solution? He talks about anger, inappropriate anger that leads to this kind of murderous intent that people have. What does he say? He says, if you're at the altar and your brother has something against you, what do? You leave that aside and you go and be reconciled to your brother. Ask for forgiveness. Figure this out. Work on the relationship rather than dealing with this bitterness and anger. Now, as a professional grudge holder, I really enjoy nursing bitterness and anger. I don't know if you do too, but it's a great feeling. It's like a little smoldering coal. It only takes a spark. I mean, it just feels so nice when you got that kind of, oh, those people drive me crazy, and you just let it kind of smolder for a little bit, and boy, is it a temptation. Now, I have not actually murdered anyone, but boy, you let that sit for a little while, and what do you start doing? You start thinking badly about someone. Then what do you start talking badly about someone? Then eventually you start working against them, and who knows where it's going to be before you're trying to liquor them up and then send them to the front to be killed. I don't know. Same thing with lust, right? I mean, that's we're all sexual beings, right? This is a huge problem in our culture. Our culture has decided that the best way to sell us anything is to imagine us with some beautiful person next to it, right? I never even thought about a Diet Coke, but since she's holding it, maybe so. Maybe I need a Diet Coke. I mean, it's ridiculous when you see it for what it is, but it has such power over. And I used to think this was just a guy thing, guys. Oh my goodness. Can you remember back in the day when to get a dirty magazine, you had to go into a 7-Eleven. It was like behind the counter in a paper bag. Not that I know anything about that, but you know what I'm saying. It was a challenge if you wanted to look at some dirty pictures, right? Maybe you had a friend that had it under the mattress or whatever. It was kind of taboo. It wasn't like celebrate. Now you accidentally flip the channels and boom, it's right there. Everyone who has a smartphone is within seconds of seeing all kinds of depraved, awful. I mean, it just permeates the culture. And if we don't have a plan for dealing with this, we're just going to get swept up in this like a huge wave. I've realized it's not just a guy thing. The marketers have decided you ladies are sexual beings too, and that you've got a whole host of issues that need to be dealt with. Am I right? No, you don't say amen. But you know what I'm saying? We're all in this need. We all have these desires that are unhealthy in some way, shape, or form. And Jesus' advice, Jesus' command, Jesus' way of dealing with this, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, chop it off. Can you imagine anybody in the church that would have any eyes or any hands? If that were the case, we'd all be walking around not being able to open up the doors. It'd be impossible. So what is Jesus? I think what he's trying to say, I don't think he really wants us to pluck out eyes and chop off hands. I think he's trying to give this sense of hyperbole, this sense of over the top, because this is such a big deal. It's not something that we just give a wink and a nod to and say, oh, I just look, but I don't touch. I'm just checking out all these kind of little things that we do to kind of say, oh, that's okay, or no big deal. Jesus is saying, you are in hot water. You are playing with fire when you let that anger and contempt fester, when you don't immediately stamp out that lust. I think it was Martin Luther that said this, but I heard Dr. Laura quoting Martin Luther, which is very weird, but that's what happened. That's how I heard it. She was talking about the sin of lust and how that, and I think it was Martin that said it, but basically, it's you have no control if a bird lands on your head, but it's up to you if you're going to let it make a nest there. I thought that's pretty good. Let me say that again. You don't have any control if a bird lands on your head, but it's up to you if you're going to let it make a nest there. Let me say it one more time. You get what Martin is saying? It's so critical, because we have thoughts flow through our heads all the time. Inappropriate, terrible things go through our brains 24/7, right? That's just part of being a sinful, fallen creature. It's just the way that it is. But if we let those thoughts take root, if we let them build a nest, then all of a sudden we become slaves to this stuff. And you see it all the time. It used to be kind of an open secret back in the days before people had smartphones and pornography was so accessible everywhere. Whenever there would be a youth convention in a big town and all these evangelical youth pastors would come to San Diego or wherever it is, these massive kind of convention areas, the thing that kind of came out of it was the amount of X-rated movies that were purchased in those weeks were way above the normal average. Can you imagine? What are Christians known for? Hey, good job, everyone. It kind of makes you a little sick to your stomach, doesn't it, to think that this stuff has permeated the church with such ick and but I promise, I don't know all of you that well, but every church I've ever been at, this has been a huge issue. And I've been dealing with it in men's ministry for a long, long time, dealing with my own life in a long time. Why? Because if you don't have a plan for working on this stuff, it's just going to take over. And David does not seem like he had a plan. What is the plan? The plan is going to war. The plan is being in the fight. The plan is being at your best in your relationship with God, your relationship with your spouse, whatever it is, and you don't leave any room for this kind of thing. There's all kinds of techniques. There's all kinds of structure, but you have to apply those kinds of strategies. It's just powerfully important. The amount of money that is spent on just a sexual ick in our culture is bigger than the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, everything that's spent on sport. That pales compared to the porn industry. It just blows your mind how much effort and intentionality seems to be going into our culture just to utterly destroy the kind of sexual ethics that have held us for so long. The message seems to be, if you have any desire whatsoever, just go for it. And we think, wow, think of the wake of destruction. We have friends that pastor churches in Las Vegas, and what are they dealing with? They're not super excited about just going down to the strip and blowing a few bucks on the slots, when we come to town. Why? Because they're picking up the pieces of all those gambling addictions, all those alcohol addiction, all those drug addiction, all those sex addiction, everything. They're just seeing the underside of that constantly. And we say, Lord, how are we going to stop that what kind of toolbox, Jesus, are you going to give us to make sure that that's not the way we fall and crash and burn? Well, of course, the way it pans out, Nathan, the prophet of God, comes to David. But he does it so cleverly. He just tells David a story. He said, I heard about a guy who had 1,000 sheep, and he was just sitting pretty, It was a great life that he had. And he ran into a guy that had one cute little lamb, and the guy stole that lamb for his own. And David, as any of us, when we hear a story like that of injustice, he just rose up with anger. And he said, that man should surely die. And what does Nathan say? You're the guy. Thou art the man. And David is cut to the heart. His adultery is revealed. His murder is revealed. Everything that he's led up to has all been on the table for everyone to see. Nathan prophesies some massive judgment against David and his house, and the rest of his ministry, the rest of his kingdom will be filled with violence and backstabbing and horror because of this. These kinds of things seem so small and innocent at first. They take on a life of their own, and then they just stay with us, perhaps for years and years. The damage is so huge. That's why Jesus says, take this incredibly seriously. And David, ever the poet, decides he's going to write a song about this experience. We find it in Psalm 51. As he's pouring out his heart before the Lord, as he's begging God for the life of this unborn child, as he's trying to make things right when everything seems to have gotten out of control. He composes Psalm 51. You want to grab your Bibles in front of you, turn right in the middle of your Bible of the Psalms. It's on page 452. We see David's cry. Why don't we just read the first 12 verses back and forth? I'll do the odd verses, and you can do the evens. You see the little preamble in the beginning of Psalm 51, to the leader, a psalm of David, when the prophet Nathan came to him after he had gone to Bathsheba. What a thing to put in the middle of the Bible, can you imagine? And yet it's that important that we learn to deal with this stuff. We'll go back and forth. I'll start. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you alone I sinned, and done evil in your sight, so that you are justified in your sentence, and blameless when you pass judgment. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. These are truth and inward being, therefore teach me wisdom in my sincere heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness, let the bones of your shall rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain me. God, we don't want to be people that miss this lesson. We don't want to be people that forget how faithful you are, even when we are faithless. And so I ask, Holy Spirit, as we enter into this time of worship and singing, that it can also be a time of confession and agreement with you. God, whether it's big or small, this sin is so powerful and so seductive. Would you save us from wanting things that we shouldn't have, or forcing things into something that shouldn't be? Would you save us from anger and lust, from adultery and murder, from any impulse, Lord, that would draw us away from you? Just hear us, Lord, as we confess together.